Did you ever open up an Avengers comic and see a rotating door of a dozen heroes? It feels like practically every vigilante in New York's been an Avenger at some point, even those without any superpowers. But then you pop open any Phase 1 through 3 movie and you just don't see that same roster. Kevin Feige didn't give us a huge army. He started us out with 6 people and kept adding 1 or 2 per movie. But why? Why did the MCU completely leave out decades of comic history, characters, and relationships? The answer is they had no choice. Between being bankrupt, having over 900 characters stuck in Sony's hands, and the sheer massive scale of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there actually just wasn't a lot of room for others. Today, we're getting into a question that's been on my mind, and hopefully yours too. For a while, why didn't the Avengers ever recruit more people? Before we get started on our deep dive, you gotta understand what it takes to make a film. In a comic book, a writer can feature 30 characters in a double page. You understand that there's a set of pages and there's also so much real estate available. That's true for movies too. There's a runtime and you gotta work with it. But in a movie, every additional character is another piece to manage, complete with pacing, framing, narrative cohesion, and an increased budget. That last bit is something we're going to get into later. This isn't my personal analysis. Joss Whedon, he was pretty vocal about the absolute exhaustion of balancing the core 6 Avengers.
I will say that the thing that I love about it, the thing that made me excited to do it was just how completely counterintuitive it is. It makes no sense. These people should not even be in the same room, let alone on the same team. And that, to me, is the very definition of family.
And he's right, it doesn't make any sense. You have a god, an out-of-time super soldier, a tech billionaire, 2 spies, and a not-so-jolly green giant/reclusive scientist in the same room. Those are such opposing personalities that most writers wouldn't bother to take on the mountainous task of making them click. Finding that synergy, crafting their natural internal chemistry as a team, and balancing all that across an interconnected narrative built upon standalone movies was a gigantic ordeal. I mean, just Cap and Iron Man alone had enough personality for a film centered just around them. Civil War? The Marvel Cinematic Universe was such a huge success that it reshaped the industry as a whole. Suddenly, everybody wanted a shared universe. Just take a look at DC. They tried to copy Marvel, but they didn't spend the time building their universe up. Man of Steel on its own wasn't enough, and then they immediately dropped Dawn of Justice in 2016, just 4 years after the first Avengers. And they're not the only ones. Even Sony was desperate in trying to set up a Sinister Six movie and create its own cinematic universe. But we all know how The Amazing Spider-Man 3 turned out, scrapped and thrown into production limbo. With an impact like that, you would think it was all planned, right? That they intentionally picked out 6 characters to focus on, to build. But that's the thing, there was no secret sauce. What Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige did was really special, timeless even, but there's something people don't know. Its evolution was really organic. Kevin Feige simply wanted to capture the essence of the Marvel comics. You would see characters who all inhabited the same universe walking in and out of each other's titles all the time. I mean, the first time we ever got Punisher, he was a Spidey villain, and over the years, they all became interconnected. That's exactly what happened to the cinematic universe too. It's like art imitating art, I guess. But even beyond that, the creators, including Feige, knew that managing a bunch of characters was going to be difficult. The reason it works in the comics is that they all have relationships to play off of, built over several decades of standalone and connected comic stories. And that is the massive hurdle the early MCU had to clear. They didn't have 50 years of active publication history to lean on. They couldn't just assume the general audience already knew why Thor and Hulk would clash, or why Tony Stark and Steve Rogers would fundamentally disagree on an ideological level. They had to build those bridges from scratch, in real time, under the crushing pressure of a 2-hour runtime. Whether it was intended or not, a simple 6-hero cast actually turned into one of their biggest strengths. Every single line of dialogue had to pull double duty. It had to move the plot forward while giving the characters a chance to know each other. And I think that nothing showcases that better than the lab argument scene.
It's because he's already made up his mind.
Oh, you know me so well.
This entire exchange is oozing with personality. Thor sees everyone as puny, tiny mortals. Steve and Tony's opposing ideologies are on complete display, along with the ensuing clash. You even get a sense of just how tired as a person Bruce really is. He's such a no BS guy in this scene, cutting through to the heart of the matter.
Isn't it? I mean, what are we, a team? No. We're a chemical mixture that makes chaos. We're a time bomb.
Ironically enough, I think in this scene, the MCU never tried to hide what Joss was talking about, that these guys shouldn't be in a room together. It brought that incompatibility center stage, and it worked. But if you threw 15 more heroes into that lab, well, that magic would have evaporated. As the franchise progressed, though, we did get those 15 more heroes, at least some of them. Age of Ultron ended in the Avengers compound, with new recruits like Sam and Wanda beginning their training as up-and-coming Avengers. We got Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, and T'Challa as well, and sooner or later, despite all the legal hell, we got Spidey too. And speaking of legal issues with Spidey, that's actually the next topic that's at the core of this question. A lot of characters were held back by legal complications.
All right, kid. You're an Avenger now.
It's no secret that the MCU has always been embroiled in legal issues. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, the root of that actually began in the 1990s. The company narrowly avoided bankruptcy by selling off the film rights of its premier characters to the highest bidder. Sony bought Spider-Man, 20th Century Fox swept up the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, and Universal bagged the Hulk. When Marvel Studios decided to independently finance its own movies in 2005, they were left with what Hollywood considered the leftovers. Did you ever wonder why the Hulk didn't have a standalone movie? It was a legal catch. Universal had the right of first refusal for distribution. What's that mean? Well, it meant Marvel could build and film a Hulk movie, but Universal had the legal right to distribute it first. To avoid bleeding cash to a competitor, Marvel took advantage of a legal loophole. Use the Hulk as a supporting character in other films. Don't give him his own standalone sequel or movie. It would mean giving Universal a massive cut of box office revenue. And they couldn't have that. They already had massive money problems. It's why they signed a multi-picture distribution deal with Paramount Pictures for Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America. They didn't have the financial leverage to go up to Sony or Fox and say, hey, here's a multi-million-dollar deal to license Spidey and Wolverine for our team movie. Then Disney bought Marvel in 2009, but they inherited a massive gamble worth over $4 billion, plus an additional $115 million just to buy out Paramount. The Avengers became the ultimate make or break test. If that movie bombed, the MCU was dead in the water, and Feige was likely out of a job. Now, we will never know what went on inside the creative rooms, but here's my theory. They couldn't have taken risks. They needed a tight, controlled, hyper-focused script that could leverage the success of the standalone movies that they had already built. Trying to manage a sprawling, chaotic comic book roster would have probably been career suicide. But it didn't bomb. The Avengers was a hit success, and by Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon actually wanted to expand the roster using the Maximoff twins. Now, this might be new for movie watchers, but those two were actually mutants and the children of Magneto, and because of that, they fell into this really weird, finicky legal gray area between Marvel and 20th Century Fox. They reached a compromise, but it was still pretty weird. Marvel couldn't actually even use the word mutant or mention their comic book father Magneto. That's why they were rewritten to be Hydra's genetic experiments. That's also why you had Fox with their own version of Quicksilver in Days of Future Past. And, personally, I think that's also why Marvel killed Quicksilver off in his debut movie, cause you just can't have too much legal friction. And trust me, there was an extreme amount of legal friction. While they eventually acquired the rights to the wall crawler with the caveat that there had to be one Avenger in each of his films, fans, myself included, didn't realize one thing. Sony owned Spider-Man's world, not just Peter Parker. Sony had the rights to 900 different Marvel characters, villains, heroes, anti-heroes, people in between, Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Venom. I mean, they couldn't even legally have Oscorp in there, man. When you take that into perspective, it starts to make sense why the Avengers roster that we've seen so far was, as good as the movies were, just a shadow of its comic self. They legally could not access hundreds of characters. Marvel actually had to claw its way out of financial hell. I mean, these guys were doing it so bad that in 1998, they almost sold off the film rights to every single Marvel character for $25 million. And get this, Sony actually rejected it. They believed the only one who had any pull with the public was Spidey. And you might be wondering how, with all these legal blockades, is it possible that we're entering the mutant saga? Well, the answer to that is that in March 2019, Disney literally bought 21st Century Fox. Yep, a massive $71.3 billion acquisition. Because Fox was the studio holding the permanent film rights to the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and the rights to mutant kind from the 1990s bankruptcy sell-off. Buying the company meant Disney absorbed their entire intellectual property portfolio. Legally, those restrictive old contracts became completely void because now the same guys owned it all. That's how Kevin Feige's steering his mutant ship so far, and it's actually pretty exciting. It means that we have access to an entire chunk of the comic world that's been locked in legal limbo forever. I think we will still see super popular characters like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, but there's officially nothing holding back the MCU anymore. In comics history, the X-Men and the Avengers have actually always been very closely tied together. Beast and Scott Summers were just as much Avengers as they were X-Men, honestly. The same goes for Storm and Wolverine. All of these guys have been in and out of the Avengers roster several times throughout their comic life, but you wouldn't ever see them in the MCU because of all the legal trouble. Actually, in the comics, there were two massive events: Avengers vs. X-Men, which was a full-out war between the two, and the Avengers Unity Squad, which was basically Captain America trying to make up for not doing enough for mutant kind. Havoc was actually offered a leading position on the squad. Maybe we could have had Chris Evans, Hugh Jackman, Chris Hemsworth, and RDJ sharing the big screen in another world. The roster we have come to know has been extremely different. See, in the comics, Captain America wasn't even a founding member of the Avengers. He didn't show up until issue number 4, when the team literally fished him out of a block of ice. The true historic founding roster of Avengers number 1 in 1963 consisted of Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Hank Pym as Ant-Man, and Janet Van Dyne as the Wasp. In fact, Janet is the one who literally came up with the name The Avengers in the first place. You have to remember the context of 2008. Marvel didn't own Spider-Man or X-Men. They were left with characters that the general public and Hollywood executives genuinely viewed as unmarketable B-list or C-list properties. Iron Man was a massive gamble. Thor required a high-concept fantasy budget. The Hulk required an expensive, non-stop CGI rendering asset. Now, this is just a guess, but I think to balance out all the heavy budget characters, they probably needed a few human anchors like Black Widow and Hawkeye. Although I think the actual reason is that it made more sense to go with Natasha and Clint, since one was established in Iron Man 2 and the other was introduced in Thor. There actually was a draft of the Avengers that included the Wasp, but Joss Whedon stated that it felt like it was too Janet-centric to work. They would need to dedicate a lot of the Avengers movie to establishing Wasp as a character, so I think it just made more sense to go with someone who didn't need all the legwork. Ant-Man was also supposed to be a Phase 1 thing, but Edgar Wright repeatedly got sidetracked with other real-world projects. So that left Marvel with, honestly, not a lot to pick from. Between Fox, Sony, and Universal owning a massive chunk of the comics roster, the high pressure to make Avengers succeed, and the fact that the first movie was a Herculean task on its own, that didn't leave a lot of room in Phase 1 for anyone else. I also think that the reason Phases 2 and 3 worked is that they continued the story of the characters we already fell in love with. All the new additions were great. Like, I genuinely enjoyed every new character that they brought in. But a fully comic-accurate roster, or hell, even a half-accurate roster, would have been extremely hard to manage while building up Thanos across Phases 2 and 3.
Avengers! Assemble.
It would also taint the solo movies for me, because I think that I would be asking things like why Iron Man isn't calling Iron Fist or Wolverine or Reed Richards for what seem to be global or universal threats. At the end of the day, I'm pretty happy with the roster we did get. Phases 1 to 3 are golden cinema history, but wondering what could have been is one of my favorite pastimes, which is why we have this video today. And I really hope it helped you guys understand some of the behind the scenes and some of the in-universe logic that shaped the roster that we've grown up with. If there is one person that I would really like to have seen, it was probably Reed Richards. I would actually take out my savings for a movie with both him and Iron Man front and center. So let me ask you this. Who is somebody from the comics that you would have loved to have seen?